Needle Feet by Lucas Lanthier. Isolde, girl on the dirt and fallen evergreen needles, splinter and thumb, 8.5, covered by summer, hot inside her fairy castle. A drop of sweat broke the barracks of dust and forest pollen that collected on her brow, and she furrowed the landscape below her hair, above her eyes, and tried to catch the spike in her hand by sight. "It stings," she said to Polly. And Polly, red ribbon mouth and purple checked skirts, whispered something to that effect over to the felt horse Wendy Blackbuckle. "And what's worse," she continued, "is that it's too dark in this castle to see." Polly and Wendy Blackbuckle stared back at her in grim concurrence. It was too dark, rather too dark. "But," continued Isolde, "we are the ones who built it, so we only have ourselves to blame, I think." Polly and Wendy stared back at her in guilty silence. They couldn't blame anyone else, certainly. "However," concluded the girl, "it is a problem that perhaps we can solve." And her two friends, in an instant, changed their countenances into displays of hopeful anticipation. After all, if they could build a castle, they could certainly invent some means of letting in a little light, at least enough so that a girl could see the splinter in her thumb. Isolde and her ladies were mistresses, or duchesses, or sometimes one queen, a marchioness, and a countess. It was a stick castle, posts and branches and some rocks, and dug into a spinney that dropped needles down on them and all around, and the roof was made of birch tree shoots, leaves attached, and pretty white bark. Isolde had a happy, warm feeling in her neck and face when she thought about her castle, her darker shade in the dappled shade of a spinney that dropped down needles. She was hidden and laughing inside, and wondered that the birds didn't come down to talk to each other, since they could presume to be alone, since she and her ladies were having tea under white birch bark, since they were secret. Polly reminded her that her splinters stung, and Wendy Blackbuckle snorted through felt nostrils, and that meant, "Let's make some windows in our stick castle shoots of birch." And really, the view was the only thing Isolde would complain about. It was something separate and wonderful being secret, but it would be nice to see out of the castle from time to time, to survey the rest of the wood, and the glade just visible through the tree trunks. And, she thought, when there's a lull in conversation, a window would be a nice place to divert one's eyes while one was waiting for Polly or Wendy to start up a new topic. The castle gate was the seat to an old wicker chair, and it could roll out of the way. Isolde, thinking of windows and even pleasanter tea parties to come, reached for it, but paused when there came from without the sound of a foot falling on pine needles. She stuck her muscles in place and guessed at the noise, which immediately stopped being noisy. "Did you hear that, Polly?" whispered the girl in the secret tones of almost out loud. "Was that someone stepping? And who?" Polly, eyes wide, cuddled up to the felt horse and bit her lip ribbons red. One footfall. Now nothing. Now would be the time for a window, thought Isolde. Who was out there? Did her mother know about the castle? No, certainly not. Nor father. Did the governess? One footfall. Now nothing. Her hand hesitated near the wicker seat, the castle gate, and then slowly retreated until her fingers, splinter sting forgotten, rested in her lap. She bit her lip and looked sidelong at Polly and Wendy, who were dusting each other with eyelash blinks. It couldn't be her father, anyway. He was away, attending to business matters, and wearing a pinstripe suit, away from the woods, away. And it was silly to suppose that her mother was standing out there, because she was sleeping or playing tennis, and besides, she didn't go into the trees, or under them, and besides, she wouldn't take one step and then nothing. And the governess. Yes, that was her, singing in Irish, down by the house and playing with the baby. Who, then, takes one step and then nothing? But then, another step fell soft on the needles, and those little pine follicles whispered to one another under their furtive burden, and then hush! Birds went back to talking in the distance. 2 steps. Suddenly, the shade of her castle felt cold. Suddenly, Polly and Wendy were very far away, their wide eyes turned blank, their sewn-up faces rendered lifeless. Under the dappled shade in the spinney in the greater wood, Near a glade, Isolde was suddenly a small girl in a house of sticks. Dusty brow and hiding. Isolde felt that she was hiding. Isolde was now scared of the 2 steps and then nothing, and whoever it was, she wanted to stay hidden from them. A 3rd step brushed the forest soil, and the birds were gone away with their voices, and the Irish governess mostly hid her song. The step touched ground carefully. Isolde thought that whoever it was must be looking around. Step, look, and then a 4th step, and closer, and Isolde knew the footfall was not a wandering, casual stride. There was intention in the pace of the needle feet, and their manner told out the progress of a slow, deliberate march on her castle. "They're coming straight at me," thought Isolde. And she knew that the eyes of the steps were not looking around. The eyes of the steps were stuck on her stick castle shoots of birch. The eyes of the steps were looking at the wicker chair seat castle gate. The eyes of the steps were looking at her. Footfall 5 scuffed a tree root and touched pebble, soil, pine needles, yards away. And suddenly breath exhaled at her, and slowly, and she could hear the wet air. And were the lungs human? Were the lungs rotting? Were the lungs monster? Were the lungs dead? And the breath leaked out like the inconspicuous escape of poison gas, invisible with tendrils curling forward. Isolde made a dash for the wicker door and threw it aside. She was going to dodge and run to the governess and scream all the way. But there, in the dappled shade under the spinney, in the greater wood, where needle footsteps had fallen towards her, there was nothing, no one, not a thing. And Isolde ran to the governess, screaming all the way.